Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how to maximise revenues based on effective pricing strategies in sponsorship with Price Labs and Alexa Smart Properties. So my name's Priya and I'll be your moderator for today's session. I'm the editor of Short-Term Rentals, which, if you are unfamiliar, is a B2B platform for short-term rental news, content and insights. So before we get started on today's session, here are two quick videos from our sponsors, starting off with Price Labs, followed by Alexa Smart Properties.
Are you ready to supercharge your vacation rental business? Meet Price Labs, the game changer in revenue management. Our cutting-edge hyperlocal pulse algorithm analyzes market trends, local events, competitor pricing, and your occupancy to optimize your rates in real time. Say goodbye to changing prices manually, and hello to maximum occupancy. There's no way to be competitive or successful without dynamic pricing. Pricing and forgetting just doesn't work if you want consistent bookings. With Price Labs, you're in control. Customize settings to match your unique property and market. Price Labs seamlessly integrates with over 150 property management systems and channel managers, and provides 24/7 multilingual support. Don't leave money on the table. Join more than 50,000 successful hosts and revolutionize your revenue management with Price Labs today.
Thanks to the Navu suite of products, property managers and short-term rental owners can deploy Alexa Smart Properties at scale across their property or portfolio. Alexa allows guests seamless access to information and streamlines your operations and notifications between guest, staff, and property management. Simply open the console, input property information, activate services, manage options, and you're ready to provide an amazing voice experience for your guests.
So let's take a look at a breakdown of today's session. So we will have a 45 to say 50-minute panel discussion with our speakers, followed by time at the end for a Q&A discussion. So if you have any thoughts or questions, then please feel free to drop them in the chat box below, and we will get them at the end of the session. We'll also be sharing links and speaker information in the chat, so please refer to that for any additional details on our speakers or any of the topics that we are touching on today. A recording of this webinar will also be made available to you within 24 hours, so please refer to your emails if you would like to have a recording of the panel. And also a short survey will appear at the end of the webinar, so please do fill that out as we'd love your feedback. Okay, so before we dive into today's discussion, we asked our readers at Short-Term Rentals the question, do you adjust your STR pricing when big events hit your local area? And according to the results, 60% of our readers said that they use dynamic pricing, while 30% said that they adjust their rates manually, with 0% saying that they often forget to change it, which is a good sign, and 10% saying that they're unsure on what to do. So it's clear that while dynamic pricing is gaining traction, there's a slight divide when it comes to how hosts or property managers are approaching the strategy. So this is all what we're going to be diving into a bit deeper in today's session, as we'll be covering the practices when it comes to manual adjustments, dynamic pricing solutions, and how you can use them to maximize revenue during key periods. So we've got a great lineup of speakers here today, but I'll allow each of them to kind of just introduce themselves very briefly, for ease, starting from left to right, as you can see on screen. So Rena, starting with you, welcome.
Sure, thank you. So, Rena Pacheco-Theard, and I'm CEO of Boutiq. We are an interesting company because we both have a property arm. So, we are managers and we have a distributed portfolio all across the US and some international markets. And then we also are revenue managers. So, we're helping other property managers. So, we began first as a tech company and then kind of grew from there.
Great, thank you. And Lisa, coming on to you, welcome.
Hi, Priya. Thank you for inviting me to join this panel. So I'm Lisa Rhodes. I have been in the industry for about 25 years as a full service property manager. And subsequent to selling my business in 2021, I've moved into consulting specifically around supporting brand strategy and brand growth specifically around women in property management in the short stay sector.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And John, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Priya. Yeah, my name is John. I'm the UK Managing Director for GuestReady. GuestReady manages over 4,000 properties on the short and midterm market in 6 countries in the UK, Ireland, Spain, France, Portugal, and UAE. We're also an OTA, so it's taking bookings directly at book.guestready.com. And in addition, we also run Rental Ready, which is our PMS system. So this also manages over 3,800 additional properties for many other property managers. And yeah, that's it. Back to you, Priya.
Great, thank you, John. So we've got a lot to get into today. So why don't we kick things off by talking about pricing strategies? Rena, coming to you, in today's kind of short-term rental market, what would you say from your experience are the core elements of an effective pricing strategy? And how do you kind of balance occupancy with maintaining a strong average daily rate?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the question that's top of mind for a lot of folks. And I thought your poll was interesting just to touch on that because your readers are already in like a more sophisticated, engaged cohort. So the fact that they've subscribed, that they're listening, that they're seeking out information. And so for even those more advanced operators and folks in the space to still just have 60% using dynamic pricing is kind of interesting, I think. So when we think about pricing and setting an effective strategy, I think one of the most crucial components is that it's bespoke to this specific listing. And so what I mean by that is it's not just bed, bath, zip code, what are neighbors priced at. It really needs to understand where is that property in its life cycle? Did it just get launched? Is it stabilized, over 2 years operating? Where is it in the life cycle? What's the demand? What are the particular attributes, the quality of that home? And it's only then that I think you're able to maximize the price because it needs to really reflect both the quality and the demand for that specific unit, right? And there's different components that go into that. And I think we'll dive into that during this discussion. And then the question about occupancy versus ADR, we believe that you should focus on maximizing annual revenue. And I think a lot of folks agree, but then you'll find there's emotion that gets in the way. And sometimes people actually see occupancy as a proxy for success, right? And so you have to understand what are the specific needs of that homeowner or that property management company in order to create kind of strike that balance. And it also, occupancy and ADR, it really depends again on the life cycle. So if you're early on, you might care a little bit more about occupancy, getting early traction for long-term success rather than saying, hey, I never want to rent this for less than $1,000 a night. You have to be more flexible depending on where that property is in the life cycle.
Definitely. So kind of taking each property as its individual needs and where you can go from there. Thank you. We'll be getting more into that in just a moment. But Lisa, if we come to you, in your experience, obviously working so closely with property managers, what would you say are some of the common mistakes that hosts or property managers make when it comes to setting prices? And how would you recommend they avoid those?
Well, having worn several hats, so having been the property manager managing landlords and their expectations, and then obviously now working with property managers and helping them support their landlords, I've definitely been in the seat where I've had landlords trying to, having unrealistic expectations of what the market should be providing them for their amazing property. And of course, they don't necessarily understand all the data that's now available to us thanks to dynamic pricing and tools, data tools that are now available to us. So I would say that some of the challenges property managers are facing is just educating landlords about, you know, what is realistic in terms of return for their property in the current market, in their market. But I would also say, like, you know, as Rena just said, you know, if you've got an established brand, and I say brand or product, and it's renting very well, you know, you can command a higher price for that product because people like it, it's well established, people know it, and they want it. You know, it's high demand. So I think people need to, as you say, balance between, you know, what the market is currently demanding and where the price. But also the other point that Rena was saying, you know, you talk about, like, you know, trying to achieve, you know, the best revenue return, but in some parts of the world we've now got legislation dictating specific numbers of nights. So for example, owners and property managers in Wales are trying to achieve a 182 figure to just comply, and that's driving down nightly rates. So, you know, we have this kind of issues that are also causing challenges for property managers at the moment around the world.
Definitely. And from what you've experienced, obviously you said wearing both hats, what kind of advice would you recommend, or strategies to kind of catch up or make up for lost revenue?
So there are definitely things, well, I mean, say revenue for me didn't just come from renting a property. Revenue came from other revenue streams. So we diversified our revenue by adding additional services. And we did that from the very start of our company. You know, we didn't just rely on the rental income from a property. We had other service portfolio offerings. So value-added services for guests, value-added services for landlords. So as a business, we didn't ever depend just on one revenue stream as a company. But we added value to our relationships with our guests by offering them a range of services. As I've said, you've got value stacking, you know, from the time that they made an inquiry, we made it clear we could offer all these other services. And to our landlords, we offered them a range of helpful services that help them to save money, optimize their property, optimize their revenue. So I think there's lots of things that property managers could do rather than just always focusing on revenue coming in from rental bookings.
Definitely. Thank you, Lisa. And John, just looping you in here, what in your view are some of the core elements of an effective pricing strategy? And could you share a particular example of a pricing approach or strategy that directly boosted revenue?
Yeah, I mean, also I just want to say to Rena and Lisa, great points there, especially on the balancing side and education of landlords, because it's super important, because landlords can just come in and expecting, you know, super unrealistic expectations. And to your question is more about what kind of examples. So, you know, we all saw when Taylor Swift came to the UK and, you know, around the world, when was it, last year, 2 years ago, and we saw kind of the you know, the ADRs go up and what kind of contributions that brought to the economy, and everyone wanted to jump on that wagon. But, you know, in certain markets like London, for example, you don't really see that same type of scalability with ADR because the supply is just so high. Where if you're looking at markets like Edinburgh, for example, you definitely saw the difference. And we're seeing kind of the same with Oasis, for example, where we have some owners in our portfolio wanting to really push prices really high, but now kind of realizing, okay, you're not going to get X amount that you wanted to get. And that's super crucial because, you know, you don't want to have these kind of knee-jerk reactions to pricing. You need to be smart with pricing well in advance and understanding your lead times to make sure that you're really capitalizing on demand events like this. So, and really understanding your market. So if you are in Edinburgh, for sure, I think you can maybe demand a higher ADR. But if you're in London, you know, there's a lot of people trying to think and do the same thing. So you just need to be a bit smarter with how you're pricing, especially in advance.
Definitely. And those events obviously play a large part, which we will get into a little bit later. And when it came to that example for John, as you mentioned, did you rely solely on automation or manual adjustments? So how do you kind of decide when to intervene manually versus kind of letting the system take the lead when it comes to those adjustments?
Yeah, I mean, we have a few clever setups as well, like at GuestReady, and in addition to how the PMS is run, a lot of it is automation. But, you know, we also have alerts that can notify you, okay, you're seeing a bit of a high occupancy this far in the future. Your pricing is probably either a bit too low or a bit too high. Like it can kind of guide you a bit. And this is why I feel like the lead time is super, super important. But it's a mix of both, I think let the automation kind of start and then really keep an eye on how it's progressing and understanding the conversion of bookings. And if you can make adjustments, do it. But also just, give it some time as well, depending on how far you are to those specific dates. But I would say it's definitely a mix for sure.
Definitely. And if we shift gears slightly, when it comes to market dynamics, I know Rena touched on this a little bit earlier. John, in your view, how do you define or analyze your core market? And why do you think it's important for operators to really understand that market when it comes to setting strategies that are going to be effective?
Yeah, good question. I think for us, we're primarily an urban market property manager. We do operate in some more remote areas, but we leave kind of the full management of those to the professionals who really focus on those areas, because trying to spread yourself too thin won't maybe always work. So asking about the core market is quite important. So, for us, like our main one is London, outside of the regulations that Lisa touched on. I mean, it is quite a good market for us. Just in terms of seasonality, it is all year, I would say, for sure. You do have your peaks. Right now we're in our peak. July is quite, I would say, the busiest month consistently over the years. But then, if you kind of, we also operate in the Northwest, so Manchester, Liverpool, where this market to us would be kind of like a second tier, simply because ADRs are slightly lower. There's different booking behaviors as well in this market, where usually it's a very weekend destination, where during the week actually smart revenue really comes to play here, and how you manage it, because you can't really expect the same ADRs during the week, for example, versus the weekend. And then, our other markets, Edinburgh, Dublin, and Ireland, tend to do quite well. And those are also quite our core markets. But we look at different factors, so ADRs, supply, like how many properties can you bring on, but also the demand of these markets, looking at factors like occupancy as well. AirDNA is a really good tool to get some insight there. But yeah, there's definitely different approaches, but that's how we kind of approach it at GuestReady, just to understand the different impacts that each market could have.
Thank you, John. And Rena, coming to you here, I'd like to hear your view on this. And what do you think when it comes to signals, and what should property operators be paying attention to when they're deciding to adjust their pricing? So things like lead time, competitor activity, booking pace. What's your view here?
Yeah, well, there's so much data that you can be looking at. So again, one of the first questions you have to ask yourself is, am I going to be looking at this data? So are you going to be either as an individual or as a team going and having kind of paid subscription access to market trends, all of, a lot of those statistics you mentioned? Are you going to use a dynamic pricing tool that reflects those? Are you going to work with a team that's going to take dynamic pricing and kind of have a consulting services element to explain it, work with you, add in your thoughts and your kind of flavor to those decision points? And so I think that's a key decision that operators have to make, is how in the weeds do you want to be? Because there's a question of, am I the best suited for this particular task? Do I have a competitive advantage? Is it the best use of my time and talent? And sometimes the answer is like, yes, like you are the best at this, and ingest all that data, make those decisions. And sometimes the decision is, you know what, there are others who actually specialize in this, and I'm going to rely upon their expertise, and I'm going to do some checks in different ways to make sure that things are lining up in a way that's appropriate. So looking at historicals, looking at what the market is doing overall, seeing how do you relate to those figures. And so I think that's actually one of the key pieces of advice, is really figuring out, does it make sense for you to ingest all of that data? Because there's a lot out there. Yeah. And I think you have to be careful about how much of it is signal and how much of it is noise, because kind of to my earlier response, it really is ultimately about each listing running its own race. And so, yes, pay attention, but like John was saying, you don't want to get emotional. Like, you don't want to say, "Ooh, it looks a little too high. I don't think we'll get that rate," or, "Oh my goodness, that's too low. I couldn't possibly." It's sometimes you have to actually trust the process and then evaluate, right? You don't just set it and forget it. But I think doing some of those tests, doing some look backs, actually seeing how things went overall can be helpful because there's quite a bit of information out there.
I would second that. I mean, I think when I started my business in 2003, we didn't have many of the amazing tech tools we've got available to us now, and it was very manual, and we did set rates, and we didn't have the bandwidth to change them. But I think now we've got all these amazing tools, but equally that can become really overwhelming for, I mean, the average business owner. When you're trying to run a busy, I had 175 properties, that was a lot of work, and I had a team. It's quite overwhelming. So revenue managers didn't exist many years ago, but they do now. And I think you're right, Rena, have somebody who is expert in something that you can trust to really analyze all that data and really make it work for you to get the best optimized, revenue strategy for your business is probably the best piece of advice I think we could give somebody, really. Yeah.
Definitely. And kind of on the topic of tech and obviously the influx of AI and tools and technology, I think it can really help us shift through that data, like you mentioned, Rena. That can be quite overwhelming, and really see how to get to the point of how pricing strategies are really going to help you individually. So when it comes to tech, John, in your view, how do revenue management solutions or dynamic pricing tools play a role in your strategy?
I mean, there is a lot, even like as you guys were speaking, I'm like, what is kind of the key? So I mean, there are, in terms of kind of the information that we're receiving, like a lot, we have the luxury of having, close relationships with the OTAs. And I think that's also quite important in kind of helping your strategies, because there are a lot of offers there that could help maximize what you're doing. And there are some recommendations that come in with their tech. So we get to see that, which is quite good. But the algorithms that come in through our PMS, we're able to leverage some of those tools with the OTAs. So if they're kind of saying to us, well, this market is actually performing under or above what you're actually outputting, let's say, they'll kind of work with us to give us some tips and to modify what we're doing. But on the flip side, they actually might be coming to us and say, what are you doing? But yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to AI, for example, there's so many things that we could be looking at, especially when it comes to certain data points. I mean, we can see, like, when it comes to upselling, for example, and experiences, what Airbnb is doing, trying to understand, one of the questions actually that popped up in here is like, how can, like, the owners don't actually benefit from that, but actually it could benefit you, because someone might be looking at the experience and understanding, okay, well, I might book that property. So while you might not be getting a full cut from that experience, you're actually benefiting from the smart kind of connection that it's making for you. I forget if Lisa or Rena mentioned it, but kind of the upselling and the additions that you can offer to your guests are so important, that it's not necessarily about what money you're making from those, but also how you're just maximizing or boosting your revenue from those types of offerings. So that's just one example, but there's so many different things, discounts, minimum stays, inputs, and things like this. So there's a lot that can be taken from tech and AI.
I actually had a conversation with a host not that long ago, a smaller host, saying, why should I bother doing upsells and additional value services, because it's just a lot of time for not much money. And I kind of thought, well, you're kind of missing the point. What you're doing is building brand value and brand loyalty and a relationship with your guests where you add more value. You're not just a product as a property, you're an organization who are there to offer almost like a concierge service. And I think that if you're still stuck in the idea that it's just about selling the property, you're going to lose out, really, because it's no longer that, is it? It's no longer a commodity, it's an experience. And that's what business owners really have got to understand today, that whilst you may not want to deliver this concierge service, actually that's where the value comes in your business offer to your guests.
Yeah, I'd like to expand on that because I actually think that is the point of pricing, actually. So it's like there's the experience element and all of the things that an operator can provide and kind of provision in that way. But it's also, when we think about pricing, There are some travelers for whom price is the determining factor, right? They have maximum willingness to spend. They're actually going to, try and search to find the lowest price. That is not most travelers. And that's not the traveler where property managers actually earn their keep, right? And so for most operators, their clients, the folks who are actually booking the properties, they're making a value-based purchase decision, which means they aren't looking at like how much did it cost, like what's the mortgage on this home and the insurance and landscaping and what should I be willing to pay for it. They're actually saying, how much is my family, my group going to enjoy this stay? How much am I willing to pay for that experience, right? And there's different indicators from the photos, the description, the reviews, all of the things they're going to help to factor into their perception of quality. And so when you can differentiate on the experience side and you can differentiate on the quality side, that's where you're able to actually get kind of that beautiful meeting of where the operator makes money and the traveler gets exactly what they want.
And I would take that one step further, because I did a bit more deep diving into that in terms of, if you really understand the profile of your guest and what's important to them, you can have, your DIY guest who goes to an urban market, who is very happy to be self-sufficient, check me in, I don't need anything, I'll go find it myself. But if you then go for the done for you client, where as Rena says, it's worth money to them to have this full wrap round concierge service and all of that, sell them everything, sell them, childcare, dog care, whatever it is you can sell them, then they'll have it, because it's just the convenience of I'm on holiday and I don't want to do any of that. Then you can really add additional value to your bottom line, but also to your relationship with your guests. And the value of that guest is not just this booking, it's when they come again and again and again, and you don't have to keep paying that acquisition cost for getting them as a client. And that's what business owners need to look at. The brand value is not just the booking now, it's when they continually come back to your brand and keep buying from you.
And I just want to add one point there, because I think those are so important. And especially when we're talking about dynamic pricing and kind of, looking at events and stuff, all of that is super crucial. If, you are charging a bit of a premium because of an event or some sort of demand, having those extra value adds or providing that value or delighting your guests becomes even more important. And I think Rena mentioned quality first, and it's such a topic in our industry. And I think, making sure that we're constantly delighting, but, if you need to go above and beyond because you are charging slightly a bit more, do it. Find ways to kind of help and adding value and making that guest, leave the 5-star review, but, wanting to come back, recommend, like that's where your revenue really, really lies, and maximizing it for sure.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And kind of something you all touched on there was the importance of kind of building that brand essence through building up experiences and your offerings. So I'd be interesting to hear a little bit about your thoughts. We've got a question that's been dropped in the chat box about how operators can navigate that, especially with hurdles such as Airbnb's newly offered services, experiences, where the hosts might struggle to build on revenue in that sense. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this as well.
It's a tricky one to navigate, I think, for a lot of people, because I don't think everybody really understands the full depth of the rules. I mean, we understand that everything that goes through the platform needs to be respectfully honoured as part of the booking that's gone through the platform, and the relationship belongs to the platform. We understand that. But I think it's a case of, my understanding is that if you offer certain other things, so long as it's made visible on the platform and can be booked through the platform, you can still offer those services. So if you offer additional things like for dog fees, I think you can still offer them, but they have to go through the platform, was my understanding. I'm not the expert on it, but I think it's just about transparency of what you're offering your guests, and it has to go through the platform rather than it going off platform.
Thank you, Lisa. And just jumping back to our questions originally on kind of technology and tools. Lisa, I'd be interested to know, obviously, when you are working with property managers, for someone maybe choosing their first dynamic pricing tool, what would be your advice, and how would you suggest they approach selecting the right solution for them? as we touched on how important individuality and meeting individual needs is as well.
It's interesting because I've only had that conversation with a client I was coaching this morning. And it's interesting because most of the clients I'm working with have been in business probably between, I don't know, 5 and 10 years. They've probably got a portfolio of like 100 to 200 properties. And some of them have tried various things. And what I hear is, like, well, I left that one because of this. And I'm like, well, how long did you work with it? Did you have an account manager? Did you really sit down with your account manager to really understand what it should be doing for you? And I think there's a bit of this kind of jumping about a bit. There seems to be a lot of jumping about between PMSs and and all the tools there are. And I think any tool is only as good as how you use it, quite honestly. So if you don't really get to know it and you don't really sit down with somebody that can really help you use it, it's not going to be as effective for you as if you really, or you had somebody in your team that could do it for you. So I would always say, sit down and talk to the key people at each of these tech options, and understand and get them to understand what's important to you. Like, what do you need it to do? What business have you got? Because all of my clients have got different businesses. Some specialize in period and character properties in one part of the country. Others have got a more diverse portfolio that goes across the whole of the country, or even internationally. So I think it's important that whatever you use, they understand what your business is and what you need to achieve. Because I had some clients that just didn't really need to rent their properties out very much. It wasn't about lots of nights booked. It was just a specific period that they would probably want to rent their property out. So I think, again, as Rena said, every property is an individual business within your business. So I would say talk to all of the options and really find out what's going to be right for you. So I don't think one thing fits everything. And equally, I'm going to be really controversial and say that dynamic pricing is not always right. The tools are not always right. It is quite controversial. They are a tool. They're a tool. At the end of the day, you have to really understand your own market, and you use it as part of your suite of tools. It's not fail safe by any means. It is just taking data, and you've then got to apply that data to your business. So I think it's risky to just go hands off. It's going to do everything for me and everything's going to be perfect. So I don't think that's true.
Yeah, for sure. So maybe less jumping around and focusing on one that might work for you and seeing how it pans out and going from there.
Yeah.
Right. And Rena, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this and your approach perhaps to tools when it comes to revenue management solutions and your strategy.
It's interesting because of course, we've tested different solutions, but from our very beginning, we went through the STRz program, which is a technology accelerator. And we went through, and from day one, we had our own pricing tool, which we had used. So my husband is one of our co-founders, and we had done this initial algorithm back in about 2014. We launched the company in 2020. It was like a side project that became a full-time. But back then, as Lisa was talking about having kind of more history in this industry, there were no tools. There was nothing out there. And so it's interesting going from kind of the Wild West to now. I mean, there are so many different tools and there's new ones popping up. And I think that that's like interesting. And I think it speaks to the importance of that function. But I also think you have to be pretty discerning, and you want to make sure that there's an ongoing conversation and relationship, as opposed to like, hey, you're just a client and they don't actually know who you are or what's going on with your properties or really care how things are going, as long as they get their take. You want to make sure, and I think because we are also operators, we understand margins, we understand you have to make more money from the tool than it costs to use it for it to make sense for your business. And I personally like having a little bit of a consulting element. I do have a background in consulting myself with Deloitte, but the idea that we're not going to just like set you off, it's come to us with questions. Let's go over, let's review that far out pricing. Let's review how things are booking. And I think that's really important. And I think folks should look for that kind of support when they find a tool that they trust. And I think these tools are going to keep changing. And even now, I think we're just scratching the surface where AI is going to be helping making booking decisions. And potentially that'll be very advantageous, where for property owners, AI might know which OTAs you should list on for your types of properties and who the travelers are that are going to be there. But you also need to make sure that you're going to surface in those searches, because they are being done and different options are being presented to travelers. And if yours aren't being presented, it's going to be a problem, right? And so there's always going to be a learning curve as things keep changing. And so keeping your fingers on the pulse of what's happening, being willing to try new things, and also knowing that change is okay. It's going to be a little bit uncomfortable, but overall, we've got to move with the market and understand what's happening to really stay ahead. And I think what I like to share is that good pricing, one, it's just like one leg in a stool. You have to have a quality operation. You need to have a quality listing that shows up in search, that actually encourages someone to make a booking, all of that. But it's one leg in the stool. But also, if pricing is done well, it works for everyone. So for folks that are on a budget, they can, if they have more flexibility, they can go on those off days and an off season, and they're going to have access to a home that otherwise they wouldn't be able to afford, right? And that's going to help fill in nights, get additional ADR and occupancy during otherwise unbooked time for that property. And if it's done well in those high seasons, it means that someone's actually able to pay for that experience, and then homeowners, the property managers, everybody is able to win with effective pricing. I really think that's the key, because if you can't make more money than it costs to operate these properties, it will not be an accommodation option. And so we need to make sure that just dollars and cents, it works for everybody.
Great insights there, Rena, thank you. And just shifting gears slightly to the topic of low seasons, seasonal peaks, like you mentioned, and local events. So obviously on the poll that we ran, we saw that there is an uptick in changes when it comes to local events and seasonal peaks. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the impact of this, and your advice for operators who want to identify key events that could drive demand in their area. How early in advance do you think they should be planning for them, and what's your advice when it comes to this? Rena, if you'd like to jump on that.
Sure. Yeah, and I think John's got thoughts too on this one. Well, there's kind of two types of, or I'll say there's kind of three main themes. So one is recurring events. So used to live in Austin, Texas. You're going to have your South by Southwest. You're going to have your Austin City Limits Music Festival. You're going to have your F1, your MotoGP. Like, you've got your annual events that you need to have on the calendar and understand when those new dates come out, right? Then you're going to have the one-off events where there's some big convention, there's a solar eclipse, there's some unique thing. And for that, hopefully the pricing tool understands it, but also you being aware of your market and those big things happening. It can also be just like work conventions and different things, or, you know, football games, etc. If there's things that are not on schedule that happen to get put on there. So being aware of things that are going to keep evolving, that are not necessarily recurring events. And then the third is just general dynamics and what's happening in that area. And so that can be weather related, that can be economic, like what are the economic factors that are coming into play with traveler behavior. So there's kind of these larger trends and larger patterns that you're going to want to incorporate. And I think with all of them, there needs to be a flexibility to say, you know what, last year I got 300 a night, but things are different. I'm going to have to accept a lower rate. And like, I've got to be good with that. Okay. So I think flexibility, and it's both on, sometimes it's going to be priced lower and sometimes it's going to be priced higher, but really trying to take that overall look as opposed to getting too hung up on the specifics of, well, this time last year I earned X. You really have to know that everything is very dynamic and you have to be responsive. And like, you yourself as an operator, as homes, no matter how many homes you have, you're not commanding the market. Like, travelers are ultimately making those purchase decisions. And so you do need to be respectful and responsive to those trends.
Definitely. Thank you, Rena. And John, just looping you in here, what would be your thoughts on this, and how in advance do you think that operators should be planning when it comes to kind of low season, or, as we touched on as well, niche markets, niche events, things that are happening in the year that might boost engagement with guests? And how can operators prepare for that?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, always gonna comment on my previous speakers here, but yeah, as Rena said, like, the recurring is super important. I mean, this is kind of, you know, goes without saying. I mean, you have like your Christmases and everything like that too, bank holidays, and just to add in terms of some popular events. So that's super important. And just another topic was, just again, we keep talking about education and making sure kind of owners are aware of how, I don't know if volatile is the correct word, but if you're having high ADRs July last month on this specific weekend, it doesn't mean it's going to translate the same. One thing that we look at when we're bringing on new clients is kind of understanding, within the postcode, like how many properties have actually come up versus last year, and like, oh, actually this is increased, so your competitiveness of your own property actually increases or can decrease. But one thing I wanted to add, which I think is quite clever, and I keep going back to AI and trying to think how we can better utilize this tool. One thing I always say is how it can help us plan as far in advance as possible. And I'll talk about Oasis again. When that was announced, if there was like an instant kind of alert or something that modified your pricing immediately, it's like, oh, these dates were announced, let me just instantly add this kind of price increase just so you can get ahead of the game a bit. Because right now I still think, we are a bit reactive there. But this, even just using like ChatGPT, for example, to say, hey, tell me all the popular events or the bigger events in Liverpool over the next, year or so, that could be super, super useful. We had a case as well, I think something again with a concert where we had a booking in Dublin into like summer 2026. And I think it was a Metallica concert or something like this. And it's like, wow, how do we get a booking that far in advance? So it's one of these things that you can never maybe at our current time 100% know, but in the future something that AI can definitely help with. But again, like I said before, kind of understanding and seeing, when a booking comes up, what does that mean? Don't just look at it as like, oh great, I got a booking in 2026. Look at it and be like, why is it in 2026? What's happening at that time? How can I maximize the revenue that's happening there? If there is a concert, could I offer a park? I don't know. There's so many things you can add on to it. It's an exciting thing to see. But you just need to make sure that you're on top of that. And again, actually to Lisa's point before, these are just tools, and there is still a human element to kind of understanding the results of this. I don't know how AI can go that far into the future with getting that, but you do need that element still to kind of understand why you're seeing what you're seeing. And we do have revenue managers at GuestReady as well and it's funny because I'm like, we never had this like 10 years ago, 8 years ago when we first launched, and now it's, this is super important. And tools can only do so much, but they're definitely obviously really, really useful.
But I'd also like to take another point, which is when I talk to clients about, being very clear on their market, there's always a with property managers, I often find where they've kind of grown their business organically that they don't really look at, being clear on a specific market. And I think that makes it quite difficult for them to kind of know, what am I looking at? Because, you could do a calendar of events, but how many of those events are relevant to your clients? If you're in an urban market, where everybody's going to come to Wembley, for example, but if you're in a more rural market, what is it people are coming there for? It's important that you capitalize on the events that are very specifically attractive to your particular guests for those particular properties. Even things like school holidays in the UK, school holidays vary so massively now from Scotland to Wales to England. They're not all at the same time. So if you're appealing to families, be aware of the school holidays. The half terms are no longer at the same dates. The summer holidays are no longer all the same length. So, those are really important points. For me in Cyprus, we were very much a family orientated destination, but in the autumn, we were your kind of semi-retiree market. So when the kids had gone back to school, we then had a very different market. You got your people who are coming over for the winter sun. So those are very important factors when you are thinking about your pricing strategy for who are you trying to attract and why are they coming to your area.
Sure, thank you, Lisa. And just jumping on what you said there, Lisa, when it comes to operators that maybe are taking a look at what they've seen from their own bookings, and maybe they've noticed a dip in bookings despite planning around, say, a local event, and it maybe didn't match what they had expected, because as you said, things can change and not everything is going to go as planned. So how would you recommend that they manage that risk and adjust?
Well, we saw that this year with a late Easter. So I don't think there's a single property manager that I'm working with that hasn't seen a delay in their cash flow injection because Easter this year was late. So they're now playing catch up this year. And, you know, when I look at the data, and I've looked at a lot of data, actually the tracking is not far off what it was last year in the UK market. So I think they will catch up. You know, they've got an opportunity to still catch up. But it made it difficult from a cash flow point of view when the market was late to start. Seasonally late to start this year. So I would say look at other, I mean, as I said, I keep coming back to this, you know, don't put all your eggs in one basket, don't put all your revenue eggs in one basket, and look at other ways of increasing revenue through other ways of generating revenue. Because I just think it's such a risky strategy just having your business solely built on one thing.
Yeah, risk management. Don't want to rely.
Absolutely. Well, and also we don't have a crystal ball necessarily at the moment. I can only talk about the UK market at the moment. We don't have a crystal ball to know what's going to happen. And one of the things I'm quite concerned about for property managers is portfolio attrition. You know, if landlords just wobble and fall off because they're so generally worried about the way legislation is going, specifically in the UK, you know, you are going to see shrinkage potentially in your portfolio. So how are you going to maintain your numbers if you potentially are going to lose landlords? You know, you're just going to keep trying to pour more properties at the front end for them to fall off the back end. That's not really a very great strategy. So I do think property managers have to look a bit further ahead. And one of the things I suggested this morning to a client was, you know, how proactively are you communicating to your landlords what's actually happening in the market? Are you just assuming that they're working out for themselves? Are you sending out a newsletter so that you're communicating? You know, there is a lot of, you know, change happening, and, you know, there's worldwide change. You know, we've got what's going on in Ukraine at one end, and we've got what's going on in the Middle East at another, and it is having an impact on travel. So the more you can educate your landlords, the more likely they're to be more like confident in what you're doing for them. You're the expert. You need to present the fact you are the expert looking after their business investment.
Thank you, Lisa. And Rena, just bringing you back in here. So obviously you mentioned earlier about data, and I think that really touches on what we're talking about here, kind of that forward planning, looking ahead, and trying in a sense to gain control over dynamic pricing and where we do think things could pick up. So how could data-driven insights kind of help ensure profitable pricing strategies during those local events? Obviously, we can't guarantee, but how could operators leverage data in the best way possible, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think we've kind of answered that one in terms of, you know, being aware, and then obviously based on the demand for those particular events, you're going to have higher pricing for those most attractive events. And I think that's the key. But there's also, as you get closer in, right? Because you have to think about that booking window. And one of the things, so I'm coming from outside of Seattle, I'm calling in. So the US data, there's a lot of uncertainty happening in, you know, domestically. And of course, there's the events that we've talked about internationally that are occurring. And so folks basically aren't booking as far out. They're kind of waiting, making sure they have enough funds, that things are stable enough for them to take a trip. So they still are going to travel, but they're not going to book it 9 months in advance, 12 months in advance, the way they would have previously, right? And so even with those special events where some folks are, you know, they're booking early and they're going to do an inquiry if your calendar isn't even open yet. So great if you can capture that, great if you can get that rate, but also being aware that folks are generally making those booking decisions a little bit closer in. And that means not making an emotional decision about, oh goodness, usually September is already booked at this point. I got to cut prices. I got to do X, Y, and Z. Like I got to do all these things. So actually looking at the booking window for your specific markets, what are those travelers doing, and being comfortable holding firm with your pricing. But then as you get closer in, if you truly are not booked up, okay, you got a discount, because do you want to get those bookings? It looks like there's other available properties. Like how do you get that booking over the other available properties? You're going to have to offer a little something extra, right? And so I think use data for those big events, use data for, you know, making sure that you've got that pricing set, but it's a continuous process based on where you are in that booking life cycle. So I think that's an important piece to remember.
Sure. And obviously, as we mentioned, unexpected market shifts can always occur. So having that understanding and that leverage with data and knowing where to look and using the technology around you is always going to be a big help. So thank you for that. And we all touched on kind of how the market and the area is evolving, and as you've all mentioned, compared to 10 years ago, probably completely different to the resources available now. So I'd be interested in hearing from each of you where you see pricing strategies going in the next few years, especially perhaps the advent of AI and more automation in revenue management maybe. But yeah, I'd be interested in hearing each of your views there. John, if we start with you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I was just thinking about, I think it was like the CEO of ChatGPT who said, like, you know, we shouldn't all be trusting what comes out of ChatGPT. And so I think we all have to be careful about how much we use AI these days. But I mean, I think, look, when we're talking about revenue here, I touched on it before. I think, you know, especially when it comes to peaks of demand, you know, kind of understand, you know, if there is something that comes out about a big event, like how quickly can a tool then react to our calendars and maximize those pricing. I think that's a big one. And then, you know, also understanding, you know, very live shifts in pricing that are happening and demand, which, you know, I'm not sure how great the tools are, all of them at this point, like how quickly they're kind of changing data. But I know for us, you know, it's, you know, daily, sometimes in a few hours, and it's not necessarily 100% like instant. And I think we could see, you know, really good tools come that are driving instant price changes and instant kind of notifications, which I think would be really good. And also, you know, and it's not just about the actual pricing, like, are you changing minimum stays and discounting and kind of the upselling, and things like this. Otherwise, you know, you can, I'm just trying to think of ways that you can really maximize revenue. And, you know, I think Lisa really summed it up quite nicely when it comes to not just looking at, you know, your nightly rates. There's so much more that can add value. So I do think, you know, speaking about it now, it's always that pattern of like, oh, we wish we could have this. Well, you know, in a year, it probably could happen, and that could really be such a game changer for these tools, for sure.
Sure, thank you, John. And Lisa, I can see you nodding there. Is there anything you'd like to add on to John's points?
Well, I don't know that I'm an expert on tech to know what it's likely to do, but I would say, and I stood by this in my own business, we were never the cheapest in anything we offered. But what we were well known, well established, and well respected as a professional business that delivered a very good service, and we built a brand, and there is value attached to your brand. So when it comes to AI, I mean, I don't use Google anymore for searching, and I now search a full travel itinerary. And what comes back from that is a whole load of options. So I agree with what John's saying is, you know, this is where search is going to go. And, you know, that gives people choices. So like, I think people need to use tools and tech as tools, but they do need to invest in building their own brand so that they can be found through AI. And that then you don't have to do the same as everybody else. Don't be frightened of, you know, standing by your pricing, by your brand. If you offer something different, better, established, you know, and people have, you know, you've got a track record of doing that. I don't feel like you should dictate your prices by what everybody else is doing.
No, sure. Thank you, Lisa. And do you personally, would you give any advice in particular, maybe for someone starting out, when it comes to getting the best results? Maybe as we're seeing things evolve and your clients that you're dealing with, I'd be interested to hear what kind of advice you'd be giving them.
Sorry, in respect to what? Sorry, Priya, sorry.
Into how things are evolving and what advice you'd give them to get the best results when it comes to evolving strategies.
So one of the things I'm definitely saying to clients is quality over quantity in terms of their portfolio. I reduced my portfolio from 200 and something to 175 to hold on to really well performing properties where I had a very good relationship with the landlords, where they understood that this was a business and we were a partnership, and in order for that business to be successful, we both needed to invest something in making sure we had a product that the market that we were attracting wanted that product, and that product needs continual investment. It's not a, you know, set it up now and it'll still be the same in 5 years' time. So we continually invested in the properties that we managed to make sure that they continually met or exceeded what we knew guests were looking for. So I would definitely say quality over quantity in terms of portfolio. And then, you know, then as you say, assess your property for the market and make sure that you set it up for success, really, in terms of its pricing strategy, its marketing strategy, you know, who it's right for, you know, get that market right. And then I think because if you don't get that bit right, then it doesn't matter what you put it out to market, you may never get the right nightly rates for it.
Thank you, Lisa. And Rena, just bring you in here. Where do you kind of see pricing strategies evolving in the next few years? And what piece of advice would you give to operators to kind of help them see the best results moving forward?
Yeah, we could have a whole discussion just on this topic. There's so many directions. And so I think that John and Lisa did a good job of kind of like already touching on some of that, but I'll share based on one of the questions in the chat was about cancellation policies. So I'll speak to that specifically when it comes to where I see the future going. So as we talked to the AI searches, kind of working as like a travel agent per se, surfacing listings that are not necessarily only from the top OTAs. So you could have lesser known OTAs that charge a lower percentage, et cetera. You can have other search engines essentially surface these results, right? And so what that may do, this is perspective. I'm just looking at what could happen, not what will happen, but that could create pressure for the OTAs to actually look after hosts a bit more. If you look at basically all of the big shifts from each of the OTAs over the past couple years, they are all to be more guest friendly. They are not to be more host friendly. That can only go to a certain extent because the difference between short-term rentals and selling widgets, for example, is, okay, I sold you a bunch of widgets. You want to return them. That's fine. Put them back in the stock. I'll sell them to somebody else. Short-term rentals, if a night is booked and it is canceled and I can't get somebody else in it, that night goes away. I can never get revenue for that night again. It's totally different. So having a cancel whenever you want, cancel right up to check-in, it really doesn't work well for short-term rentals, but it's what guests want, right? And so there's a lot of change that's happening there. But if there's more competition essentially between the OTAs to actually surface listings for travelers, then I think there might be an opportunity for cancellation policies and other policies to actually support hosts more in order to retain inventory and customer trust, host trust to actually stay listed on those platforms as opposed to shifting your inventory somewhere else. So I actually think there's the potential for hosts to get back a little bit of the power because it's ultimately their homes that are the product, right? But I think a lot of the shifts have been to try to make things more guest friendly, but it needs to be a balance, right? Guests definitely need to be looked at, but hosts need to be looked out for. So I think that's something that we'll see. And I think it's just really exciting what the future is going to be. I think there's going to be more and better tools, which can cause confusion and may not always provide the right results. But I think for those who are going to really analyze them and then work with the trusted providers, we're going to get better results. And I ultimately believe that better results are better for everyone in that ecosystem. So I think it's a really exciting time.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that great summary there, Rena. That looks like our time is hit now, but thank you for our incredible discussion today. I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our speakers for sharing their insights. I think it's been a fantastic conversation, and I'm sure our attendees can take away some actionable strategies here when it comes to enhancing their pricing strategies. So thank you. Before we finish up, there's just a few closing comments from me. So if you please sign up to our next webinar, all on the hidden cost of the wrong accountant, why STRs need industry-specific finance support, in partnership with Exemplify, coming up soon on the 29th of July. And thank you again to our sponsors, Alexa Smart Properties and Price Labs. Just a quick note from me here, our tickets for our STR Summit taking place on the 5th of November are now live on Eventbrite, so please do secure your space using the link available in the chat box below. And if you are interested in working with us, then please refer to the details on screen of my colleague Sam, our head of growth here at Short Term Rentals. Further information can be found in the chat box as well. And again, a final thank you to our listeners and to all of our speakers. Again, thank you, and please enjoy this closing video.